Hi, this is Celeste, and this is the Celestial Report deep dive on Soulcatcher. So we'll get with the diabolical plan to erase you from reality and to turn you into a disembodied um, soul. And is that even possible? Is it biblical? So let's find out. So, what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to be talking about the difference between the soul, the animal soul, excuse me, still froggy this morning, and sorry about that. Is your soul borrowed from God? And where is the soul located in your body? And this is really critical. And is it possible for you to be stripped, your soul to be stripped from your body, becoming a disembodied soul while you're still alive? Does a hybrid have a soul? And where does the hybrid go upon death or cessation of life? Or do they even have a life? Is it possible for a disembodied soul to inhabit a synthetic body? And will a disembodied soul go to heaven? These are some of the questions that we're going to begin talking about today, and it'll work in tomorrow, but today will be the lion's share of the heavy lifting on some of these questions. So today we dig into the soul and the implications of the soul as it pertains to the status of hybrids and human synthetic humanoids among us. There are burning questions that you have really been longing to have answered since the beginning of 2020. This is the day to have some of those or most of those questions answered, but we are going to have to roll up our sleeves and we are going to toil in the Word of God to tease out those nuggets of information and truth that we need to know about these questions. So this particular section is soul searching. It's important before we kick off this module to remember that the Hebrew differentiates various levels. There's like 5 different ones mentioned in the Hebrew scripture for soul. This is not translated into the English. We just see the word soul. But the Hebrew, the original language, does distinguish. I'm not sure. I didn't really go and see what the Greek Septuagint, except on brief occasions, has to say on the differentiation. I don't know how far the Hebrew, as translated into Greek, distinguish the different types of souls. So the nephesh is the breathing soul and also the animal soul. And the meaning of neshama is the human soul. I have translated the words from the original Hebrew so to make it a little bit easier for you to focus on the concepts rather than struggling with these Hebrew words with strange characters. So Ezekiel 13 establishes the fact of a disembodied human soul. That would be your neshama. The disembodied soul is a breathing soul, is reflected throughout the Bible. As a matter of fact, I want to tell you, insert before we move on. So back in, I think it was the 80s or the 90s, the chief rabbi in Israel was called because under the Temple Mount, there was believed to be found the tabernacle of the wilderness. That's the one that Moses built in the wilderness when the children of Israel were going from Egypt to Israel. And how did he know that it was the authentic tabernacle of the wilderness? So, according to tradition, and this is tradition, is that tabernacle breathed like a human being breathed. And you almost have to wonder. I know it's anthropomorphic, but does God breathe? Because we are created in the divine image of God, and he breathed life into us, and we're going to be exploring that. So the chief rabbi of Israel did determine that this was the authentic tabernacle of the wilderness, and that area was sealed up for the day and time to come, which I believe is going to be very shortly. So anyway, now we're going to move on and we're going to explore the disembodied soul consigned to a time limbo. I think this is fascinating with this direct energy weapon and some of the other 5G and 6G, which is playing with our ears, our vestibular apparatus, which is in control of our, and this would be for a human or an animal, our sense of orientation, space, and time. And the book of Daniel talks about this. So James Frazier's major proof text is 1 Samuel 25:29. And once again, I did translate this from the Hebrew to bring you as pure of the concept as I could give you. The breathing soul of my Lord will be bound up in a bundle of the living life in the care of the Lord your God, but he will sling away the breathing soul of your enemies as in the pocket of a sling. And remember, I really need to go down and I think this is really significant, but that is a topic for another day and another webinar. So we can also go to Ezekiel 13:20. It speaks of the human soul being in things other than a human body, the bundle of the living or life, leaving us a question whether if the human body has been gutted and soft robotics inserted, whether this verse would be applicable, because they are making it possible for these synths to breathe, and they can, according to James Giordano, if the soul is captured, it could be relocated into something else. And of course, that's what the elite do want, is to have a synthetic body, which is not carbon based, a silicon body, and then have all their soul and their consciousness uploaded. So this is what we're talking about. In David's case, the pocket of the sling, and in the case of the enemies. So that's what we're talking about here and how it's applicable to today. In Ezekiel 13:20, the word soul refers to a kind of bag or a vessel. And once again, that is what those synths are being created for, to host different spirits, soft robotics, and the like. I believe also of fallen angel, the fallen angels, the giants of old, and the Bible, it talks about the human body being a vessel also. So we have to be, on one hand, we can talk about the synths. On the other hand, we talk about the human body being a vessel. It's one of my favorite scriptures, is for we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the transcendent power belongs to God and not to us. Three other prose, could you back up, please? Three other prose passages seem to locate the breathing soul outside of the human body, even if only implicitly. Next. When her breathing soul went out for when she died, Genesis 35:18, and we've looked at that before, the breathing soul of the child came back inside of him, literally to his insides, and he revived, from 1 Kings 17:22, and my breathing soul went out when he spoke, the Song of Songs 5:6. Next. For the first two, we see that the breathing soul departs at death and returns with life. So most scholars take the breathing soul in these two verses as meaning life, but this is problematic. It is difficult to reconcile with the phrase to his insides, which we find in 1 Kings 17:22. Next. Life is not an entity that can be located in space. This is really important. Life is not an entity that can be located in space. We never find life occurring in any expression similar to life which is inside, mentioned in Isaiah 26:9, that she has a breathing soul in it, Genesis 1:30. But the important takeaway from this slide, back up please, is that, back up please, I guess not. So life, the important thing is that life is not an entity um, that can be located in space. As they play with our sensory organs, God is outside time and space. And in the satanic agenda, they are trying to get our soul out and make it soulless and placeless. And so we'll be seeing this as we go on. From the first two, we see that breathing soul. Okay, next, please. That's a repeat. Next. So my breathing soul is in me, 2 Samuel 19. One might have expected to find that that has life in it. Instead, we find the breathing soul of life in it. Genesis 6:17 and 7:15. The breathing soul does not necessarily mean life. So if we see a synth on the street that's breathing, that does not necessarily mean that it's a life. But that's very deceptive because under the Philo Code, they are defining it as a life form or a humanoid. So King 1722 comes from a poetic counterpart. Return, my breathing soul, to your resting place, for the Lord has been good to you. Psalm 116:7. Next. The psalmist, having saved from death, turns to his breathing soul and tells it to return to its resting place. Most translators have rendered the term as rest, but there is good reason to follow the halak, meaning resting place. The word resting place functions in the sentence as a verb of motion. Now, okay. Your soul, your innards, and the disembodied soul. So in 1 Kings 17:22, suggesting that the resting place of the psalmist's breathing soul are his innards. So typically in ancient civilizations, they considered the gut as your innards. The plural number matches the plural number of my innards. So there's something called gematria, which adds up the letters, and it's verification, and only God can do this. It's amazing, really. In my soul, bless the Lord, and all my innards, bless his holy name. Psalm 103:1. So here's a note that this must refer to the places in the body where the breathing soul resides. On the other hand, Psalm 116:7, where every translation available to me renders the breathing soul with the soul, representing the breathing soul, does not mean life. So every single translation is a breathing soul does not equal life. So this is a technology note. This means that a synthetic humanoid that breathes does not have life, according to God. Next. There does seem to be a little difference between the action in return, my breathing soul, to your resting place, and that depicted in the bird. The soul came back to the nest from which it has departed. And we began studying that yesterday. Next. One is human and one is animal. We can see in Psalm 116:7 and 1 Kings 17:22, this can be viewed as evidence for the disembodied human soul. The interpretation of the breathing soul as life makes even less sense in the Song of Songs 5:6, since the latter refers to fainting and not death. That my breathing soul went out when he spoke refers to fainting is confirmed by an Egyptian parallel in the phrase, my soul departed, collocated with I lost consciousness in a passage from an Egyptian story. Next. I found his so this is the Egyptian story. I found his majesty upon the great throne, set in a recess paneled with fine gold. As I was stretched out on my belly, I lost consciousness in his presence. This God addressed me in a friendly way, and I was like a man caught by nightfall. My soul departed, and my body shook. My heart was not in my body. I could not tell life from death. Next. There is another hint that the breathing soul does not mean life in this expression. If it did, one would have expected to find the life of X went out in the Bible alongside. Such a phrase is nowhere to be found. We also find the same evidence in the Akkadian, where we find X with the same meaning as X, and in the Akkadian, the into Napsat X, the life of X ended. We do not find this either. Instead, we find X with the meaning X longed for. Next. So why is this? Because motion can be attributed only to an entity that can be located in space. Again, I'm going to repeat this because motion, this is a verb. Could you go back, please? This is a verb which indicates motion that can be attributed only to an entity that can be located in space. And life can't be. On a tech note, this is why the scientific community following the satanic agenda are bent on direct energy weapons which damage your vestibular apparatus located in your ears, causing you to lose this orientation, space, and time. It is a process that they use to disembody your soul. This works hand in hand with witchcraft inserted into your body through pharmaceutical platforms, detaching your soul, basically disembodying and making it free for capture by the sorcerers and witches. So this is a tripartite. There's the breathing soul, life, and respect. This is kind of interesting, I found. Consequently, the breathing life or the breathing soul and life are not synonyms, at least in expressions to referring to the termination of life. We should not be misled by the fact that the taking of a breathing soul results in the loss of life, or by the fact that in English, taking a person's life. So what I'm getting at here is that we will see a day where these synths with the soft robotics, or maybe some evil people got uploaded or whatever to this this other life form, they are going to have rights that they cannot be murdered. So that's what we're kind of talking about in that previous slide. We should not be misled by the fact that that there is a distinction between the breathing soul and life, because it is blurred in biblical poetry, where the two do occur in parallelism, such as, do not bring my breathing soul to be with sinners and the murderers of my life. Psalm 26:9. For my breathing soul has become sated with misfortune, and my life has reached Sheol. Psalm 88:4. Okay. What such examples show is not that the breathing soul can be used with the meaning of life, but that life can be used as a poetic epitaph for the soul. This use of it is related in some way to the use of life, or a live living creature, as a term for soul, as can be seen by comparing, let the enemy pursue my breathing soul and overtake it. Let him trample my life to the ground. Psalm 7:6. I'm hoping that you're seeing this now. Next. So with, for the enemy pursued my breathing soul, he crushed my life to the ground. Psalm 143:3. The poetic use of life as in, may my breathing soul not come into their counsel, may respect not be joined in their company. So now they're adding, remember we have building blocks here, and now we've established that soul, then we have life, and now and breathing. And now we're going to add the building block of respect. And that comes to us from Genesis 49:6. Indeed, 3 in 1 description corresponding to each other. Let the enemy pursue my breathing soul and overtake it. Let him trample my life into the ground and let my respect dwell in the dust. Psalm 7:6. The poetic use of life and respect may well derive from the fact that without a breathing soul, a person has neither life nor honor. And this is important as we move forward into a very strange day. It should be obvious that the correspondence of the breathing soul and life in parallel is less revealing. Let us examine this significance of my breathing soul is disgusted with my life, from Job 10:1. In this example, the two terms are clearly not interchangeable. Next. Contemplate the meaning of my breathing soul, bless the Lord, who forgives all your sins and heals all your diseases and redeems your life from the pit, that we find in Psalm 103:2-4. Next. Here again, we see that the terms breathing soul and life are quite distinct. The clear implication of these passages is that the breathing soul has life, even long life, as it is referred to in Genesis 12:13, 19:20, and I'll just read the next one, 1 Kings 20:32, and you can read on. There's other examples as well. Or just life, just as it has sins and diseases. Comparing Psalm 103:4 with Job 10:1 makes one wonder. A person's breathing soul, or part of the soul, was thought to have life of its own, distinct from the life of the person. Again, that's a very important concept. So the ancients, including the biblical, indicate that the soul, the breathing soul, is a distinct entity, surviving for a certain amount of time in the grave. So there are, like even in the Hebrew, they do believe that the soul kind of lingers for a time, even at the death of a person. There are people that have a near-death experience that can see their body that's dead, and that they're hovering above. So that's an example. The belief that the soul can exist outside of the body is not identical to the belief that it is separate and distinct from the body, but the latter belief is probably a necessary condition for that of the former. Next. So there is this soul body dualism, and if you're going to study this apart from this webinar, just be really careful, because this is a preview note before we dive in, is that I found a lot of, when I looked up soul body dualism, there is a lot of other faiths and ideologies other than the biblical, including New Age. And so you really need to make sure that if you're going to study it from a biblical worldview, you are aware of these other ideologies that will take you down rabbit trails that you probably don't want to go down and consider it as basic gospel truth. So now we'll get into it. So let us review the passages that used to be viewed as evidence for the body-soul dualism, passages in which the term breathing soul is contrasted with the expression of referring to the body. So in Job 2, 5-6, the expression for body that stands in opposition to, so in opposition to flesh and bone, which is literal flesh and bone, as we find in Genesis 2:23. Next. So in verse 5, the adversary says to the Lord, "But lay a hand on his flesh and bone, and he will surely curse you and your face." This comes to us from Job. The Lord accepts the implied personal with one caveat. He is hereby in your power. Only his breathing soul you must safeguard. So if he was dead, if he was a corpse, so the Lord is distinguishing it. You must keep him breathing. Next. In this example, it is certainly possible to render the breathing soul as life instead of soul. That is not the case, though, however, for in some of the examples below. Another passage that appears to belong here is, "His flesh is too wasted to be visible, his bones too rubbed away to be seen. His breathing soul comes close to the pit, his animal life to the executioners." John, I didn't get the message here. Okay. Oh dear. Here again, we have a passage that speaks of a person having a body with meat and bones and a psyche and animal. So we've got this duality. So now we're going to continue the topic. In Proverbs, we find two topic terms for the body interchanging, with a cure for his whole breathing soul equaling his body, which comes to us in 422, occurring alongside, and a cure for the body, which comes to us from 1624. These abbreviated expressions for the body can stand in opposition to the breathing soul. For our purposes, the most important example of this is from its breathing soul to his meat. And it's, you're just going to have to look it up. It's Isaiah 10:18. I have little things on my screen that you don't see, and it blocks out some of the things. So I do the best I can. So most of the major versions take it to be merism. That's another thing that is very new age, this term merism. So be careful with it as you do your own personal deep diving, denoting an entire person similar to the English body and soul. In poetry, merisms are very often broken up, with the component nouns used as parallel as word pairs. For example, a merism in the Bible would be heaven and earth, and they appear together in Deuteronomy 32:1. And the body and the soul receives the same treatment. And in the scripture, a merism was okay. But like I said, be very careful when you study the concept of merism, it is entrenched with false ideologies. So in Psalm 63:2, the breathing soul serves as an abbreviated expression for body. It is a parallel to the psyche. And that is important for us to start understanding, because when it talks about taking the mark, it talks about the head or the hand. So we have to start thinking of psyche. So maybe it's the head as far as our understanding of the mark in Revelation. The New Jewish Publication normally avoids any hint of the soul-body dualism and renders this as my soul thirsts for you and my body yearns for you. We find virtually the same rendering in the 10th century in the ancient Jewish commentator, the Sadia Gaon Arabic translation. My soul has thirsted for you, and my body has been heartsick for you. Two additional examples are found in Job. I will take my meat in my teeth, and I will place my breathing soul in my hands. And rather, it is for himself that his meat feels pain, and for himself that his breathing soul feels grief. Job 14:22. Both are examples that exhibit parallelism between the body and the soul. In any event, the meaning of life is not possible for the breathing soul in Job 14:22, and that fact must be considered in interpreting Job 2:6. So everything has to, when we understand scripture and we're looking at one word, we do have to look at the full context of the other words' placement in the scriptures. As an example of bone serving as an abbreviated expression for the body, and contrasting with the breathing soul, according to most major English versions in Proverbs 16:24. Sorry about that. Pleasant words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the body. Here again, the Sadia Gaon has a very similar rendering, sweet to the soul and a cure for the body. And here again, the meaning life is not possible for the breathing soul. Okay, now we studied for the last two modules, we got into the pillow traps and dream souls, and we're going to continue on that and dive in a little bit deeper. Another example, heal me, O Lord, for my objects or my innards are agitated and my psyche is very agitated, or my mind. We might say angst today. Psalms 6:3-4. We should also reconsider the meaning of the breathing soul or the psyche in expressions such as we won't slay him, literally, we won't smite him, we won't smite his breathing soul or his psyche. So there's this link kind of between the breathing soul and the brain, which is one reason why the mark in Revelation may be really important. So Genesis 37:21. And he shall slay him, literally smite him on the breathing soul or the psyche. And this comes to us from Deuteronomy 19:6 and 11. To slay you, literally to smite you on the breathing soul or the psyche, we also find in Jeremiah 40:14 and 15. The word breathing soul or psyche in this expression is frequently taken to mean life. But here again, we never find a variant of the expression with life instead of the breathing soul or psyche. Nor can the breathing soul or psyche mean a person. Remember, in our everyday, at least in America, I don't know how it is in other countries, but I think it's probably the same. A person can even be a corporation or a system in the legal sense. They can have a legal representation. And I do believe that in the days to come, these humanoid synths will have personhood as distinguished from an actual human created in the divine image of God. So it's natural to conclude these refer to part of a person that exists in space, not a life, which is noted is not an entity. There can't be life is not an entity that can exist in space. So where does the part of you that exists in space reside? So the scriptures tell us beautifully, the soul of your flesh resides in your blood. Leviticus 17:11, and also it is a witness in Deuteronomy 27:25. But it only resides in your blood when you have the soul of the flesh, when its owner is conscious. So we're going to explore that a little bit. So this is why Dr. James Giordano says that the 21st century war is neurocognition. That's this war against our brain, by psyops and pharmakia and all these weaponry over here. There's a whole weaponry that I've been covering. If you want to check that out, you could check out the Whack a Brain series that's on Rumble. Not tanks, not bombs, not ships or troops. And I know many of you are distressed that the tanks and the missiles and the ground troops are being eliminated or being sent to foreign countries. This is to eliminate them because the new warfare is against the brain, against humans, and its frequency. It's the prince of the power of the air. The old tanks, the old modes of military are outdated. They are no longer relevant. They've been deemed irrelevant. So this also explains by when you why when you go into a hospital, if you are given a medication, you are considered under the influence of witchcraft, which they don't tell you, and then your rights are removed and given to another person. This is you are transferring the chain of custody of your body to the hospital or the physician. There is a war not only for your natural brain and consciousness, but also to simulate or counterfeit or clone your brain and consciousness for these synthetic humanoids to replace you. These finding complements what we saw above. Although the breathing soul or psyche is not part of the body, it is part of a person. Perhaps we should also re-examine Zedekiah's oath to Jeremiah. As the Lord who has made this breathing soul or psyche for us lives, I will not put you to death or deliver you into the hands of those men who seek your breathing soul or psyche. Jeremiah 38:16. So modern scholars have struggled with the former expression, largely because they have insisted on interpreting it to mean life or the breathing soul or the psyche. It is very abstract. Lives are not entities that can exist in space. It makes little sense to speak of them as being made of or pointed at. Souls, on the other hand, were viewed in antiquity as mannequins. And don't be offended. I mean, the first time I read that in my research, I thought, well, that's kind of degrading, but you'll understand, capable of being depicted by artists. So they were tangible. They had a place in space as a mannequin, but a life, on the other hand, is it's just not there. Like a mirage, a phantom, or whatever. It could be real, it could not be real. And if life is too abstract a meaning for the breathing soul, what about Ezekiel 18:4? In his hand is the breathing soul of every being and of the life of all human flesh. Job 12:10. If the human soul made by God are souls, it seems natural to assume that the human soul is owned by God, and the human soul held by God in his hands are also souls. So this is a tech note. This means that God owns your soul. Whether you believe in him or not, God owns your soul. You have no right to forsake your divine birthright of your soul by taking any blood altering or changing tool or substance into your body, period, because your soul, your blood is God's, and To do anything that would interfere with that is undermining his sovereignty and right as God who gave you that soul. And so that is an absolute of our faith. So having a conversation between me, myself, and I. So I can do this oftentimes. I live with Mississippi, but I can also have an argument and examine questions in the Bible from me, myself, and I, and look for different views of it. So it might be beneficial to ponder the significance of passages in which the poet or the psalmist turns to his breathing soul and addresses it directly with my breathing soul. So the Hebrew Bible contains at least a dozen such passages, including Jeremiah 4:19, Psalm 42:1 and 6, 43:5, and so forth. One of them has already been discussed, Psalm 116:7. The psalmist usually puts an imperative before the vocative, exhorting his breathing soul to bless the Lord or the like, but sometimes he asks it in a rhetorical question, such as, "Why are you downcast, my breathing soul, and why do you murmur against me?" Psalm 42:12. The longest exhortation stretches over 5 verses in Psalm 103, 1 through 5. It must be stressed that there are no instances in the Psalms of my heart, my mouth, my tongue, my lips, or my life for that matter. Thus, it would not be correct to view it as mere poetic conceit. "Be still, my beating heart." It would be more accurate to compare my breathing soul, bless the Lord, Psalm 103, 1, 2, and 22, and 104, 1, and 35, with "O peoples, bless our God," Psalm 66, 8. Can this be considered evidence that the psalmist perceives a difference between himself as the speaker and his breathing soul as the addressee? In answering that question, we might take our cue from James P. Allen, who writes, "The Middle Kingdom," so that's the Middle Kingdom in the ancient world, literary text known as the dialogue of a man in his Basel. So this is not the Hebraic view, this is either Egyptian or Babylonian, reflects the view that the Ba as a separate mode of existence, in this case, an alter ego with whom its owner could hold a dialogue. That kind of helps us to understand a bit better what the psalmist was taking or describing. So Jan Assmann makes this Egyptian text even more relevant to our question by characterizing it in an allusion to William Butler Yeats as a dialogue between the self and the soul. The most important biblical evidence for the disembodied soul uses the term wind. So now we've got the breathing, we've got soul, we've got different building blocks, the breathing soul. Now we're going to be talking and adding another building block, and that is the term wind, or it uses no term at all. The precise semantic relationship between the terms breathing soul or psyche and wind is not easy to determine. The two terms are similar enough in meaning to be used in poetic parallelism. My breathing soul yearns, literally, my breathing soul and I yearn for you at night, and my wind, which is inside me, seeks, literally the wind, may I seek you out at dawn, Isaiah 26:9. I shall speak in the anguish of my wind. I shall complain in the bitterness of my breathing soul, Job 7:11. And then we have the last. In his hand is the breathing soul of every living being, and the wind of all human flesh, Job 12:10. So there is a semantic similarity between the breathing soul and wind, and it can be seen in their apparent interchangeability in certain expressions, but not always. For example, in reference to revival, it is sometimes the wind that returns. So we see this in two places. He drank, and the wind came back, and he revived, and that comes to us from Judges 15:19. And he ate, and his wind came back to him, and it comes to us from 1 Samuel 30:12. And sometimes it is the breathing soul that comes back. The breathing soul of the child who had stopped breathing came back inside of him, literally to his insides, and he revived. 1 Kings 17:22. And they fought food for themselves to make their breathing soul come back. Lamentations 1:19. We should also note that inside and innard is used to describe the physical location of the prophet's wind, and we see this in Isaiah 26:9, the new wind of the people, and we see this in Ezekiel 36:26, the wind of every human, and we see this in Zechariah 12:1, and the revived child's breathing that we see in 1 Kings 17:21 and 22. This implies that the wind of humans, like their breathing soul, is an entity that can be located in space. But remember, that's distinguished from life. It's different. Furthermore, it is normally to be found inside people during their lifespan. So they're not a corpse. So a tech note. We may speculate that this is one of the reasons masking is so critical to the integrated technical witchcraft plan. In addition, if you have not checked out my article on masking, it is over at shepherdsheart.life, and you can just type in masking. It is always associated with spiritual adultery, lawlessness, and wickedness. Are you beginning to see how they incrementally overtook the globe using sorcery, and they started with the mask, with our badge, that we are submitting to the witchcraft and sorcery of this world. So the soul and the life is in the blood. What then is the relationship between the breathing soul and the wind? And what is the relationship between each of them and the soul of the flesh? And since mine is blotted out, which we're going to talk about in the last module, but I can't see it. But the scriptural reference is Leviticus 17:11. Oops. John, my screen just went mini. I don't know why. So, could you make a full size? I can't see it at all. Thank you. Okay, next slide. Next slide. So the first question has been answered in many ways through the ages. For the moment, only one of these answers needs to detain us. 80 years ago, Rene Dussard suggested that the breathing soul is a vegetative soul that resides in the tomb, while the wind is the spiritual soul that leaves the body after death. This suggestion has been largely ignored, even though it is very commonplace in Assyriology and Egyptology. We can view that the soul of the flesh is what the modern anthropologists call the body soul. Indeed, the term flesh is sometimes referred to the body. There is a claim that the ruach, or the breath, is always said to be within the innards of someone. And you can see the reference there if you want to deep dive into that. Alongside with this statement that the flesh is in the blood, we find assertions that the breathing soul is in the blood, according to Leviticus 17:14b, and that the blood is the breathing soul. And we find this in Deuteronomy 12:23. Do not pour out my soul, Psalm 141:8. This may reflect the view that the blood and the breathing soul form a homogeneous mixture. It means it's very hard to separate out, much like goat milk, which is very hard to separate out in different separate components, a sort of blood soul solution. So if you want to deep dive, you can deep dive into the Ramban, that or Nachmanides on Leviticus 17:14. And his view is that the breathing soul has no physical substance. The native dictionaries of classical Arabic give the meaning blood for nafs in addition to soul as a self or a person, etc. In the view of Edward W. Lane, this is because the animal soul was believed by the Arabs, as it was by many others in the ancient times, including Aristotle and some other people, to diffuse itself throughout the body by means of, it's kind of like ether, like vapor. The life is in the blood may mean that the body soul rather than the flesh soul. In any event, the term suggests that there is another type of breathing soul or psyche. One, the flesh is soulful, a bodily component located inside our blood. And two, that the wind, a spiritual component, is bestowed to us by God. The expression of the soul of the flesh is commonly abbreviated to animator. Now, this is going to become, I want you to be thinking of God animates man from the dust of the earth by blowing life into him. But in the future, we may see the animation of various things. The animation of the giants of old and their spirits, the animation of, well, reanimation of actual physical giants, which they are actually repopulating to their indigenous locations for this time of animation. Only their animation would be done by hydrogel and quantum dot. It would have that factor built into the genetic material and the bones of these people. They're even talking about like Pharaoh and some of the other biblical pretty nefarious people in the Bible, they have genetic material for them that if they add hydrogel to it, they would animate them. So be thinking about that aspect, the future, which is coming shortly, as well as God animating us into life in our beginning. So indeed, the abbreviated and unabbreviated forms of the expression occur together in a single verse. For the animating, breathing soul is in the blood. So God is animating us to life when He breathes into us. That means the breathing soul and the psyche affects expiation, and that we can find in Leviticus. Thus the term soul can refer to the body alone as well as the entire bipartite soul, the body soul, and the wind. The semantic analysis provides a plausible solution to a problem that has long puzzled scholars, especially those who the primary meaning of breathing soul is life, vitality. So how did it acquire the meaning for corpse? And we see that in various verses beginning in Numbers. So the meaning corpse developed from the meaning body soul, just as the meaning person developed from the meaning soul. So we see this linguistic evolution, if you will. We might hypothesize that every creature has breathing soul with its blood in it, perhaps only blood with a pulsating flow. So that's another thing is so some commentators believe that it's not just it has blood, but it must be pulsating. So when your heart stops and the blood stops flowing in your body, it would no longer be a breathing soul. But only a creature with a flesh soul has the breathing soul, and both a flesh soul and the divine wind of life in it. So that's what distinguishes us from the animal, is that God, so well, a dog and a cat do have a nephesh, a breathing soul. They don't have the divine wind that was breathed into them by God the Creator. And we get this from Genesis, and can be said to have a living soul and be a living soul. So we see this distinguishing of a human from an animal. Nothing affects expiation other than breathing soul blood, as it is said, for it is the blood that by means of the breathing soul in it affects expiation. Leviticus 17:11. Which part of the blood issuing from a slaughtered animal is the breathing soul blood? As long as it spurts, this is a Hebrew understanding. As long as it spurts, it is still considered part of the breathing soul. So you can have life support and like a heart lung machine, be on a heart lung machine, and you're still a human. But as soon as, and you're still a breathing soul of a person, according to the ancient text, but as soon as your blood would, let's say you had a cut and it no longer spurt, then that would be defined as expiation or death, and you would be a corpse. And at that point, your breathing soul would leave. A sketch or portrait biblical soul has been sketched in the past. The earliest one is found in the writings of Philo of Alexandria. We use the soul in two senses, both for the whole soul and also for its dominant part, which properly speaking is the soul. And I've heard about that many times, the soul. And therefore, the lawgiver held that the substance of the soul is twofold, blood being that of the soul as a whole, and that of the divine breath or the spirit of that of its most dominant part. And it is that homogeneous mixture. Philo goes on to cite two proof texts, one being Genesis 2:7, the other Leviticus 17:11, to reconcile the contradictory views regarding the substance of the soul. So Genesis 2:7, according to which, at least in Philo's understanding, the soul consists of a pneuma, a vital spirit, and two, Leviticus 17:11, which contends that the soul consists of the blood. In any event, Philo concludes that the biblical breathing soul has two parts, a superior rational part and a subordinate irrational part. Although the entire breathing soul consists of blood, one of its parts dominates the other. The dominant part consists of the spirit of divine origin. Perhaps we are to think of this spirit as being dissolved in our blood of the breathing soul. So we are a breathing soul, and the divine spirit is within us. Philo's distinction is reflected in the writings of Josephus and Paul of Tarsus. For Josephus, the words for the soul appear as soul types or soul components. And hereafter, on the seventh day, Moses began to interpret nature and writing on the formation of man in these terms. God fashioned man by taking dust from the earth and instilled into him spirit and soul. For a, for a history of the soul division, the bipartite and the tripartite, see the recent work of Benjamin P. Blosser, like the angels origin, that is not origin as the creation of man, but it's a person, author, doctrine of the soul. At death, the ruach, or the breath, ascends to the celestial garden. The neshama, the human soul, returns to God. I have some returns to God, but the nephesh, the breath soul, lingers near the gravesite as an active presence, and that comes to us from Abraham ben Ezra, who is a Hebrew ancient scholar or commentator. For a suggestion that the et emu, and we looked at that, and the other word that I can't have trouble pronouncing, are parts of the soul. In Mesopotamia, you can see Hayes, death of the Iron Age too, for most on soul types and soul parts in Mesopotamia. If you want to deep dive into what the other ancient cultures believed on the different parts of the soul, you can deep dive into that. Only a creature that has a living soul can be said to be a soul. Thus, by breathing into the nostrils, a soul of life equals the breath of life into man. But it's a divine breath. God activated or animated and vitalized the soul of the flesh in his blood, turning it into a human soul, or the entire bipartite. If Josephus's assertion is based on such an interpretation, there is no need to assume that Josephus self-invented it. His assertion may well reflect earlier traditions, one that gave rise to the views of Philo and possibly even Paul of Tarsus. So, what is the early Christian views on the spirit, the soul, and the body? So, Paul and the early church fathers view that there was a trichotomy of the spirit, the soul, and the body, a tripartite view of man. I think, in a way, it follows that the triune God, that template of the triune God. Not that we're gods, I'm not saying that, but just spirit, soul, and body. In modern times, it is the domain for scholars and theologians, and not many of us take time out of our busy days to do inquiry, but that's what we're doing today. At the very end of the 19th century, Robert Henry Charles attempted to breathe a new spirit wind into the tripartite man, a wind that would time travel back to the Hebrew Bible or the Torah. So here is what has been determined by the early church fathers. The spirit is not personally conceived. It remains in man so long as he lives. The spirit forms in him a thing apart by itself, so it's a distinct entity, and the spirit must be regarded as forming part of man's composite personality. We have seen here a real trichotomy of the spirit, soul, and body. When we examine these elements more closely, we will see that the soul is a result of the indwelling of the spirit in the material body. Sorry. And it has no independent existence on its own. It really is a function of the material body when quickened by the spirit, so long as the spirit is present. So as long as the soul, as long as the soul is a living soul, but when the spirit is withdrawn, the vitality, and we touched on vitality in Tuesday's module, so if you want to go back, you can review that. It is but the vitality of the soul is destroyed and becomes a dead soul or a corpse, according to Numbers. Annihilation of the soul ensues inevitably at death. That is when the spirit is withdrawn. This dissolution of the personality at death is frankly recognized in Ecclesiastes 12:7, and the breath of life returns to the supreme fount of life, and the spirit shall return to God who gave it. It is possible that the soul of the flesh and the wind were viewed as being physically attracted and remaining so from the time of the soul's departure at death until the decomposition of the flesh around 12 months later. That is the view, Hebrew view, and some of the more ancient civilizations, but not so much in Christianity. Charles A. Briggs views the meaning of spirit of the living, breathing being dwelling in the seat of man and animals. So remember, there is a soul in animals, the nephesh, the human soul, neshama. As examples, he cites the God of the spirits of all flesh, Numbers 16:22 and 27:16, creator of the wind of man within him, Zechariah 12:11. In his hand is the soul of every living being and the wind of all human flesh, which we looked at earlier in Job. According to Briggs, the wind or the spirit that lives in man and that departs at death. Among the examples he gives, we may mention that he remembered that where a dead soul is corrected to a soul of a dead man, they were merely flesh with a wind that goes out and does not return. Psalm 78:39. His wind goes out and he returns to his dust. Psalm 146:4. You must bring in their life and they expiate, returning to dust. And that comes to us from Psalms. If we would turn his attention to it and bring in to himself its wind and soul, all flesh would expire at once, and mankind would return to the dust. Job 34:14 and 15. And the dust, equaling flesh, returns to the ground as it was before, and the wind returns to God who bestowed it. In all of these examples, the wind occurs a context that appears to reflect this dualistic conception of the human being. Only through the contact of the Jews with the Persians and the Greeks thought did the idea of a disembodied soul having its own individuality take root in Judaism and find its expression in the later biblical books. As for instance, in the following passages, the spirit shall return unto God who gave it in Ecclesiastes. However, based upon the discussion of the breathing soul, there is reason to believe that the idea of the disembodied soul is found in most strata of the Bible. And then there's lots of examples for you if you want to deep dive between the earthly destination of the body and the heavenly destination of the spirit. Scholars should think twice before dismissing it, as the later Isaac Rodi discussed. Hebrew thought could distinguish the soul from the body as the material basis of life, but there was no question of two separate independent entities. And an entity, remember, going back to the beginning of today's module, it can be pinpointed in space, except for the possibility or for the possible trace of the Greek idea in Job 4:19. Those who dwell in houses of clay, whose foundation is in the dust, is dust. The other challenge is the traditional view that involves a shift in understanding of life among the scholars, a similar shift to one of the nephesh, or the breathing soul. As a result of the shift, the wind came to be understood as meaning the breath rather than the spirit. So Ross Shoemaker, this is his a quote, "At death, the breath returns to God who gave it." And we see this in Psalms, Job, and Ecclesiastes. According to Shoemaker, it is the breath of humans that returns to God, not their spirit. A similar replacement of the spirit with breath can be seen in H.W. Wolf's Anthropology of the Old Testament. In the chapter entitled Ruach, or the breath, or breathing wind, are included in the section entitled Breath. Indeed, the chapter 31 does not even contain a section entitled Spirit. Among the English versions of the Bible, the NJPS appears to be the most consistent in exercising the spirit of the living, breathing being dwelling in man and animals that Briggs saw in the verses cited above. It renders life with breath in 7 of them, and I list those out for those of you getting the written material. And breath equals life in 1. In Job 34:14, it employs the rendering of spirit, but that it is only because it takes the life there as God's spirit. According to the so this is a Jewish version of the Bible. Then God has a spirit, but humans do not. So is it possible to show that the meaning of breath makes less sense than the meaning of spirit in at least some of the verses in question? Take, for example, God of all flesh, Numbers 16:22 and 27:16. If wind were a mass, uncountable noun, meaning breath, i.e., breathing or the ability to breathe, in this verse, it would not be able to take a plural ending. It makes more sense to imply that each living creature possesses its own individual vitalizing spirit, which animates it. The same goes for the creator of the wind of man within him, Zechariah 12:1. So once again, the Jewish Bible, it's not the Torah, I don't believe, renders this as who created man's breath within him, but which meaning of English breath fits here? It is difficult to believe rendered form or fashion by Briggs, Driver, and Brown. Remember, Briggs, Driver, and Brown is the equivalent to the Strong's, if concordance, if you're familiar with that, is used here of creating the ability to breathe within a person, or the act of breathing, or even air inhaled and exhaled. It appears to be bending over backwards to avoid the rendering of spirit used in the other major English versions. So here we see a split between the Torah and the English versions, and that is, does a person have a spirit or not, or is that the spirit the sole domain of God until we become spirit and become one with him? So once again, the Hebrew who formed the human spirit within. Similarly, breath does not make much sense in the verse that speaks of the wind returning to God. The clearest example is, and of the dust, which equals flesh, returning to the ground as it was before, and the wind of a person returning to a human, returning to God who bestowed it. Here again, it's difficult to believe that what returns to God is the person's ability to breathe, or a person's act of breathing, or the air inhaled and exhaled by a person. One gets the impression from the verse that what returns to God is independent of the flesh and lives outside of it, but it's in the blood, but outside of the flesh. The other two verses that can be shown to belong here are, if he would turn his attention to it and bring in to himself his, or it's all the flesh would expire at once and mankind would return to the dust. Job 34, 14 and 15. Back. And bring in their wind and they expire, returning to their dust. Psalm 104:29. It will be noted that I have taken it to mean bring in those two verses. The most obvious in context where the meaning gather or assemble makes no sense. And remember, in Hebrew, sometimes a Hebrew word can have many different English words or different concepts in Hebrew. Note also, your sun will no longer go down, literally go in, and your moon will not set, literally be brought in, as we see in Isaiah 16:20, with these two near synonyms in parallelism. So we're going to examine some of the interchanging. All of that generation were brought into their ancestors, Judges 2:10, and therefore I am about going to bring you into your ancestors, 2 Kings 2:20. The term breathing soul also appears in Ecclesiastes mainly as the seat of the appetite. Again, Briggs, Driver, and Brown. The semantic development from gather equaling bring together or bring in is easy to be explained based on agricultural use. This is an ingathering in which the fruit is both brought in from the field and brought in the field and brought in from the field. Just a subtle nuance there. It is very similar to the semantic change exhibited from the root to gather and bring together, which has a meaning enter or come in, and in the Mishnah Hebrew. For an insightful treatment of this development seen alongside, you can look at, as for you, you shall go into your ancestors in peace. Genesis 15:15. And it will go into the circle of its ancestors, Psalm 49:20. According to this, sorry, I didn't take an allergy pill and I should have done that. Hold on just a sec. According to this interpretation, Job 34:14 and 15, or Psalm 104:29 speak of the wind as being brought. Hold on just a sec. I'm going to try something else here. Peppermint oil. We'll see if this saves the day. And those of you can be praying. Thank you. See, prayer worked. Thank you, guys. So Job 34:14 and 15, Psalm 104:29 speak of the wind as being brought by God to himself, that is into his divine abode. Assuming that this interpretation is correct, it is the most natural to take the ruach, or the breath, or wind, in these verses as referring to the spirit from God that animates flesh during the life and returns to God at death, as in Ecclesiastes, and probably in number 16 as well. So, if so, this is further evidence for the disembodied wind or soul. So, that was a big, lots of new concepts probably for you to examine. And so next time we're going to go into probably more modern, like what is going on with ghosting and disembodying you as a form of persecution and murder. But we will be going into like, is ghosts, are ghosts and ghosting, is that even biblical? So if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them right now. And if not, you can leave them down below, or you can ask. Now, I have limited time, but you can write Celeste at celestialreport.com. So, any questions, John?
We have a couple of questions here, Celeste. Thank you. Very interesting material there. So let's get to the questions that we have here on the screen. First of all, first question is, what is QOH as a Bible reference?
Ecclesiastes.
Okay.
The book of
All right.
Ecclesiastes. In Hebrew it would be Ecclesiastes.
Okay, and the other question here, somebody writes, in my King James Bible only soul is mentioned, not breathing soul. Which biblical version states breathing soul?
So that's where you have to go to your primary languages. Both the Hebrew and the Aramaic distinguish out the soul into different things that we don't get in the English. It's kind of like also Lord can be in Hebrew, it can be different. Adonai, master, it can contain different words. So you would have to go to your primary languages. There are some newer Bible translations, such as, so I think in the Companion Bible, you could get it in the sideline, but that's not always convenient. You can go to Dr. Pigeon's The Sefer, and I believe that he does break out the Hebrew into the translation from the Hebrew into English. So for an easy, so that you can see the breathing soul and just be able to distinguish these different nuances of the soul.
And just to clarify, so the breathing soul really is a sort of transliteration of the Hebrew, right? That would be a fairly accurate summation of it, wouldn't it?
Yes, I did translate it from the Hebrew, and it's breathing soul. But for a human, it would be, because an animal also has a breathing soul, but and it would have to be, for a human, it is the breathing, I have to qualify it. So it's a breathing soul that was animated, the breath of the divine image into us that is housed in our blood.
Okay.
Now, so that would be kind of a full sentence of it.
Now that brings us on to the question of animals, and there's a couple of questions about animals. One question, do animals have a spirit?
So remember, we started talking about spirit at the end, and I didn't really go down the spirit rabbit trail on this. They do in the Hebrew Bible have a nephesh. They are a breathing soul, but they don't have the component. God allows breathing, but he did not infuse animals with the divine image of God that he bestowed upon humans alike. And that's another reason it's so dangerous to take modern pharmaceuticals that edit our blood, because they're mixing animals with us. They're changing our blood, and then we become more like a beast or an animal.
So that leads on to the next question about animals here. What somebody's written, what is God's purpose for animals?
Well, we know he created them in the beginning, and that Adam was to name them. I don't know. Were they for our enjoyment, companionship? I don't think God clarifies why he created them, but that just we were supposed to be good stewards over them and name them, and I think love them, and they're part of a good quality life.
Yeah, you're right. God doesn't always tell us why he does things, does he?
No, he doesn't consult us, but that's one of the things that when we go to heaven, we can ask him, why did you create the animals? What were their purpose? And maybe it was to practice love and compassion. Sometimes loving a human is hard, but loving an animal, that they usually are unconditionally loving. Even if you were grouchy one day, you can bark at your dog and they just come with you, a happy smile, wagging their tail, or a cat purring, jumps up on your lap and is purring, and just so maybe it's just for learning another way that we can practice our relationship with each other and with his creatures, his creation, so that we can improve and mature in our own faith.
Okay, yes, indeed. Now, there's a couple of questions here about nanotechnology. Question, what is the place of nanotechnology to connect us with the spiritual world?
So, as we've been talking about throughout this webinar, nanotechnology, I believe, originated with the fallen angels. It is technology that should have never, mankind does not have the wisdom, and it is operating and being controlled by witchcraft. And the head witch at the top would be Satan, Lucifer, whatever you want to call him, is orchestrating the nanotechnology, and that they are manipulated by things such as the Valkyrie, Boeing aircraft, and Ouija, and some new ones coming on board that just popped up this week. So I have to go in and find out what DARPA is up to, and I'll be bringing you that information in the days to come.
Okay, another question that's written here. Does our DNA consist of, it's written this way, I may have to insert a word to make sense of it. I'll read it first as it's written. Does our DNA consist our spirit? And if it is not, where is the dwelling of it in the human personality? So I think that the question the person is asking, does our DNA consist of our spirit? And if it is not that, where is the dwelling of it in the human personality? And I assume that the question is about the spirit rather than the DNA. Does that make sense?
Yes. So basically, it's not. So the Bible really refers to it. There's debate about the spirit, but the soul that God imparted to us with his divine image breath resides in our blood, which is our DNA. And that is why it is critical that you do not alter that DNA, because then salvation becomes. Um, Jesus did not come to die for hybrids. It does not say that. He came to die for humans, and only humans alone can receive salvation. So when you go tweaking with your blood, it is located in the DNA in your blood. Dr. Pigeon has a take. I've heard of it. I have not explored it, but that the very name of God and the numbers of God is written in the two-stranded DNA, and that when you accept a third strand, which many of these nanotechnologies and pharmaceuticals do, it creates a third strand, then that may be a sign that that is the mark, and that salvation may or may not be possible. It would depend on the mercy of God, and if you repented and you plead with him, he desires that all be saved. And I'm not going to put God in a box and say he can't do it, but according to his word, he says that those that take the mark And I believe that that's talking about alteration of your DNA, your blood, because our soul is in the blood and it's holy unto God. That he alone, as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, has the option whether you would be eligible for salvation. It puts you in a very precarious position spiritually.
Okay, another question here. Celeste, will you be equating this information more with the future of what the evil men will be planning for us?
Oh, of course. I mean, like I said, I've already seen some DARPA stuff that just popped up on the screen that since I was doing this webinar, I haven't had time to explore it, but it is working. It is the witchcraft, or you might say the beast system communication network is expanding. I believe that a week ago we entered a shift where I don't know if it was a portal opened. I don't know what tripped it. I believe that we're going to see a real increase in many different things, especially the supernatural evil and the beast system um, structure come into play. And certainly I will be bringing you that information as the days go on. But I'm glad we're having this discussion, and we have 2 more modules left for some more foundational, and they're going to be very different than this, like ghosting, and then can you be erased from the book of life? That's going to be pivotal to understanding the future technologies that they're rolling out right now.
And question somebody wants to know, am I tweaking with my blood when I take medicines from the pharmacy?
So at this point, they are not going to tell you if it's genetically altering you. It is my belief, based on the journals. I don't know what particular medicine you're taking. You could ask for the professional insert. It may or may not tell you, but if it did tell you, it would be in doctorese, you know? So, you might understand it or not. And this is evolving. Like one day, a medicine may be fine, and the next day they may add the genetic editing component, and they may or may not inform you of that. As we go along, there's going to be less and less consent because they want to shift and give rights and informed consent to the robots, the synths, rather than humans. So you're going to find this degrading of the value of a pure human as the days go by. So in this, they may not tell you. So I would be suspicious of anything, because over and over again throughout the whole Bible, pharmakia, it plays a huge factor, and that is the pharmaceutical drugs. So that places one in witchcraft, under witchcraft. It is not that you're practicing witchcraft, but that is a door that the enemy can use to exploit in your body. And I take one medicine and I'm trying to get off of it because I don't want any doors in the days to come. We have a hard enough struggle ahead of us that we don't need that door.
Somebody says back to the middle or previous episode. That's really the question is, where did you get the information what Jesus was writing in the sand? Make a reference to that.
So yes, I did. And so I did archaeology in the Middle East. And so that comes from Gary Collette, who is now with the Lord. And it makes sense, and it will make more sense after we read and study module 6, which is, can you be erased out of the book of life? And so we're going to be talking about that more in depth then. But you see, when Jesus wrote down, he knelt down twice, and I believe the first time, and Dr. Collette believed the first time, that he was writing the sins of the Pharisees that were standing around him, and they saw that. And then the second time he knelt down, he was blotting them out of what they recognized as the book of life. And that's why the older ones, they recognized it. They knew that they were guilty and all had sinned and gone astray. And so they left first. And it was the younger ones that are kind of going, what happened here, that kind of trailed along after the rabbinical leaders. So that's where I got the information, but it does make sense. But you can interpret it or not that way. But we will be discussing that in Module 6.
Thank you, Celeste. Very good. Next question. When a person chooses to participate in out-of-the-body experiences, can their soul be stolen?
Yes.
2 parts to the question. And how does one protect their soul while sleeping?
So we went into that in great depth in Tuesday's Module 3. So I would hope that you could review that at your leisure. But yes, yes to the first. And then how do you protect it? The number one, ask the Lord to protect you as you go to sleep. But also the second thing is to don't give your blood under any circumstances. I mean, I've been pretty firm and consistent in this since the very beginning of 2020. And doctors, please forgive me, but you're looking at it. Yes, you can get some results that may help a person, but no longer are those blood results between you and your doctor. It goes out to the quantum computer. It's open source. People can do experiments with it. There can be rituals done with your blood. It can also be used to target you in a precision weapon system and pick you out of all the people in the world. And we talked about that in the last Module 3, that is how witches and sorcerers and people of evil are targeting you and targeting your soul. So the best thing, and I would just go to the Lord. I mean, I just was forced into a blood test myself, but it's the first blood test I've had in eons. But I had no choice. And I am just I'm repenting. I have repented. And I'm going to the Lord and saying, please nullify any weapon formed against me. And I'm claiming those promises of God. But I wouldn't now that I know this, especially about the witchcraft, no more blood tests for me. I'll take the consequences of whatever I have to endure, but no more blood tests.
Okay, another question here. What was the name of the doctor you mentioned who speaks about God's name being written on our chromosomes?
So is it, John, what's the author of the Sefer? Is it
Pigeon?
Stephen? Yes, is it Stephen Pigeon or Walter Pigeon?
I think that it might be Stephen. I got a feeling
it might be Stephen or Walter Pigeon. Pidgeon. And I am going to be on with him again next Friday, not this Friday, but next Friday. And I was on a panel with him as well last Friday, and we can get you the link for that so that you can watch that. It was very good. It was a great episode.
And somebody would like to know, have you interviewed with Jason Beshears?
No, I have not.
Okay, I think that sums up all of the questions. Celeste, I don't see any more questions here. Just to remains to remind people that if you're watching on CloutHub, the replays will be available on CloutHub. If you're watching on Rumble, replays are available on Rumble. And also replays will be available at celestialreport.com. And the other thing to state is that this was episode 4. Episode 5 will be on Tuesday, the 23rd of August at 9 a.m. In both of the locations that we are sorry, not 9 a.m., 12 noon. My apologies. It'll be 12 noon on the 23rd of August on Cloud Hub and on Rumble channel.
And the written material is I'll be sending it to Larry here in a moment. I wait for to release the written material for the days module afterwards. So as soon as I get a moment, I will just get that over to Larry. And then as soon as he gets it, he will be posting it and sending it off to the people who have purchased the written material. So I am making all the modules available in a written form so that you can examine them yourself in your leisure and go over it and look scriptures up and make notes and take notes and ask questions. So thank you very much for your interest on this topic. I find it really fascinating. I really pray, my prayer is that it really helps you in the days to come to understand the biblical foundations of things like the soul, the spirit, the life, witchcraft, and how witchcraft is intersecting with technology these days. So have a blessed week, and we will see you on Tuesday at noon for ghosting and how this all fits in to the big picture. So it will be very different than all the rest of the modules. So we're going to be learning new words, new concepts, and examining, are ghosts even real, and are they even, is this a biblical thing, or is this something, a phantom of our imagination? So God bless you, and we'll see you next time.